Hi, everyone. Let me ask you something real quick. Have you ever stayed somewhere so strange, so eerie, that it felt like the walls themselves were watching you? If not, you're about to hear a story that will make you think twice about spending the night at an old lodge in the middle of nowhere. But before we dive in, I have a question for you. Where are you watching this from right now? Let us know in the comments below. And hey, don't forget to hit the like button if you love creepy, mysterious stories like this one. All right, let's get into it. My name is Ethan Carter, and for the past 5 years, I've been working as a night manager at an isolated lodge in Tennessee. At first glance, it looks like any other countryside retreat. Cozy wooden cabins, flickering lanterns, and a pristine lake that reflects the moonlight perfectly. But what the brochures don't tell you is that the place has rules. Strange, unbreakable rules. I found out about these rules on my first night. My boss, Mr. Whitaker, handed me a laminated sheet with the lodge's policies. Most of it was the standard stuff. Don't disturb the guests, keep the lobby clean, and no smoking indoors. But then, at the bottom of the page, there was a separate list of rules, written in bold red ink. Rule #1. Never leave the front desk between midnight and 3 a.m. Rule #2. If the phone rings and no one speaks on the other end, hang up immediately. Rule #3. If you hear a knock at the lobby door after midnight, do not answer it. Rule #4. Never under any circumstances acknowledge the woman in the white dress if she walks through the lodge. I laughed nervously when I read them. What is this? Some kind of joke? I asked Mr. Whitaker. His face darkened. Take these rules seriously, Ethan, he said. If you want to keep this job and stay alive, you'll follow them, no questions asked. That night, It started at 12:15 a.m. I was sitting at the front desk, scrolling through my phone to pass the time. The lodge was dead silent. No guests were in the lobby, and the only sound was the distant chirping of crickets outside. Then, the phone rang. I picked it up. "Good evening, Lakewood Lodge," I said. There was no response. "Hello?" I repeated, but all I heard was static on the other end. I hung up, remembering Rule #2. My heart was racing a little, but I told myself it was probably just a prank call. 15 minutes later, I heard a soft knock at the lobby door. It was so faint that I almost missed it, but it was there. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I froze. The knock came again, louder this time. I glanced at the clock. 12:30 a.m. My mind raced. Rule #3 was clear. Don't answer the door. But what if it was someone in trouble? What if a guest needed help? As I debated what to do, I heard a faint whisper. It was coming from just outside the door. "Ethan." My blood ran cold. How did they know my name? I didn't move. I didn't speak. The whisper continued, growing more insistent. "Ethan, open the door. Please, it's freezing out here." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay put. After what felt like an eternity, the whispers stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was over. But then, I heard footsteps. They weren't coming from outside. They were coming from behind me. I spun around, but the lobby was empty. My skin prickled as I realized the footsteps were moving toward the stairwell that led to the guest rooms. I grabbed my flashlight and followed, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The staircase was dimly lit, and every creak of the wooden steps sent a shiver down my spine. When I reached the second floor, I saw her, a woman in a white dress, standing at the end of the hallway. She was facing away from me, her long hair cascading down her back. At first I thought she was one of the guests, but then I remembered Rule #4. My chest tightened. I was supposed to ignore her, but my eyes were glued to her motionless figure. Then she started to hum. It was a soft, haunting melody that sent chills through my entire body. Slowly, she began to turn around. I bolted back to the lobby without looking back. That was just the beginning. The next few nights brought more strange occurrences. Phantom footsteps, shadowy figures flickering in the corners of my vision, and that woman, always at the edge of my sight, humming her eerie tune. But the worst thing happened on my fifth night. On my fifth night at the lodge, the air felt heavier than usual. It was as if the entire place was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I had followed every rule to the letter so far, but a part of me was starting to unravel. The whispers, the footsteps, the woman in white. It was all too much. At exactly midnight, the phone rang. This time, I didn't hesitate. I picked up the receiver and immediately hung it up, just like Rule Hash 2 instructed. But as soon as I placed the phone back on its cradle, it rang again. I froze. My hands trembled as I reached for it, my mind screaming at me not to answer. But before I could decide, the ringing stopped on its own. Silence. Then, the lobby lights began to flicker. One by one, the overhead bulbs dimmed until the room was bathed in shadows. My breath quickened as I fumbled for the flashlight on the desk. When I turned it on, the beam caught something, or someone, standing at the far corner of the room. It was a man. He was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, the kind you'd see in black and white photos from the 1920s. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were pitch black. "Ethan," he said in a deep, raspy voice. I stepped back, my heart hammering in my chest. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if studying me. "You've broken the rules." "No, I haven't," I stammered. "I've followed every single one." Before I could finish, he raised a finger to his lips, signaling me to be quiet. Then he pointed to the front desk. I turned my head slowly, dreading what I might see. There, sitting on the desk, was the laminated sheet of rules. But something was different. The rules had changed. The red ink at the bottom now read, "Rule Hash 5, do not speak to the man in the corner." My stomach dropped. When I turned back, the man was gone. I felt like I was losing my mind. None of this made any sense, and yet it was happening right in front of me. I grabbed the laminated sheet and stuffed it into my pocket, determined to figure out what was going on. At around 2 a.m., I heard it again, the soft knock at the lobby door. This time it wasn't faint. It was loud, insistent, and echoing through the empty lodge. I glanced at the clock, my pulse racing. An hour left until my shift ended. Just one more hour. "Ethan." The voice was back. "Ethan, please, open the door. You don't understand what's out here." I clenched my fists, my eyes locked on the door. The voice sounded desperate, almost human, almost. Then something slid under the door. It was a photograph. I picked it up cautiously, my hands trembling. The picture showed the lodge's front desk, but it wasn't empty. I was in the photo. The blood drained from my face. I looked around the lobby, half expecting someone to be standing there with a camera, but I was alone. Or so I thought. A sudden chill filled the room and my flashlight flickered. That's when I saw her again, the woman in white. She was standing by the staircase, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her lips curling into a sinister smile. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was clear. "You shouldn't be here, Ethan. They're watching." "Who's watching?" I shouted, my voice cracking. She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed toward the ceiling. For a moment, I thought she was pointing at the chandelier, but then I noticed something else. There were shadows, dozens of them, crawling across the ceiling like spiders, and they were coming down. "Let me know if you want me to continue," you said. KML ChatGPT said. ChatGPT. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding like a drum as the shadows crept closer. They weren't just moving, they were alive, twisting and writhing like they had minds of their own. The woman in white simply stood there, her smile growing wider, as if she was enjoying the spectacle. I shined my flashlight at the shadows, hoping to scatter them, but the beam seemed to pass right through them, like they weren't even real. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to move, backing away toward the front desk. And then, the whispers started again. This time they were louder, dozens of voices overlapping, chanting words I couldn't understand. The sound was coming from all around me, bouncing off the walls, crawling into my ears. I pressed my hands to my head, trying to block it out, but it was useless. "Leave," one voice growled, low and guttural. "Stay," another one hissed, sharp and venomous. "Run," a third whispered, almost pleading. I didn't know what to do. My instincts were screaming at me to get out of there, but something held me in place, like an invisible force was rooting me to the spot. And then I remembered the rules. Rule #1. Never leave the front desk between midnight and 3 a.m. I glanced at the clock. 2:15 a.m. 45 more minutes. I just had to survive for 45 more minutes. The shadows were closer now, so close I could feel the cold emanating from them. One of them reached out, its tendrils curling toward me like fingers. I ducked under the desk, my breath ragged, clutching the flashlight like it was some kind of weapon. That's when I felt it, a hand on my shoulder. I whipped around, ready to scream, but there was no one there. Suddenly the phone rang again. The sound was deafening in the silence, and it made me jump so hard I nearly hit my head on the desk. My first instinct was to ignore it, but the ringing wouldn't stop. It just kept going and going, drilling into my skull like a relentless siren. With shaking hands, I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" For a moment, there was nothing but static, and then a voice came through. "You're breaking the rules, Ethan." My blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't human. It was deep, distorted, and echoing like it was coming from somewhere far away. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. "You should have never come here." The voice replied, "You don't belong." And then the line went dead. I was trembling now, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I needed answers. I needed to know what was happening to me, to this place. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, pulling out the laminated rules. That's when I noticed something strange. The ink was smudged, as if the words were melting off the page. And there, beneath the original rules, new ones were appearing, written in blood-red ink, as if they were being scrawled in real time. Rule #6. Do not attempt to leave the lodge before 3 a.m. Rule #7. If you see yourself in the mirror, do not look away. My stomach churned. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. A sudden crash from upstairs made me jump. It sounded like something heavy had fallen, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. I grabbed the flashlight and turned toward the staircase, my pulse racing. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. No response. The footsteps stopped, but the air was thick with tension. I took a hesitant step toward the stairs, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The light flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow dart across the second-floor landing. "Ethan." The voice was back. It wasn't coming from the stairs this time. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat. But the lobby was empty, or so it seemed. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, echoing off the walls. "You shouldn't be here. Leave while you can. They're watching." I couldn't take it anymore. My mind was unraveling, and I felt like I was on the verge of losing control. But then, I remembered the last rule that had appeared on the list. If you see yourself in the mirror, do not look away. The weight of Rule #7 pressed heavily on my mind, and instinctively, my eyes darted to the large, ornate mirror hanging on the far wall of the lobby. At first, the reflection seemed normal. The dimly lit front desk, the staircase, and me, clutching the flashlight like my life depended on it. But as I stared longer, my reflection began to shift. It blinked. I hadn't blinked. A chill ran down my spine. My reflection tilted its head to one side, a slow, deliberate motion that didn't match mine. Its mouth began to move, forming words I couldn't hear. My legs refused to move, frozen in place by sheer terror. Then it spoke. "Ethan, you've been warned." The voice wasn't coming from the mirror. It was behind me. I whipped around, my breath caught in my throat. But the lobby was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, my reflection was gone. The mirror showed the room, everything but me. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and a sharp wind seemed to whip through the lobby, even though the doors and windows were shut tight. The whispers were back, louder now, overlapping into a cacophony of voices that drilled into my skull. "You shouldn't have looked. You broke the rule. They're coming." I stumbled backward, my flashlight flickering wildly. The shadows on the ceiling were descending now, spiraling downward like a swarm of insects. Panic took over as I bolted toward the desk, searching for anything that might help. A weapon, a clue, anything. That's when I saw the journal. It hadn't been there before. Its leather cover was old and cracked, the pages yellowed with age. Scrawled across the front in dark, messy handwriting were the words, "Do not trust them." I flipped open the journal, my hands trembling as I skimmed the pages. The writing was frantic, almost illegible, as if the author had been in a hurry or terrified. "They don't follow their own rules. The rules are a trap. Don't trust what you see. Don't trust what you hear. And whatever you do, don't stay past 3 a.m. My blood ran cold. The clock on the wall read 2:45 a.m., 15 more minutes. The next page had a crude drawing of the lodge, with strange symbols scrawled over it. Beneath the drawing was a single sentence: "The basement is the key." The basement? I didn't even know the lodge had a basement. There was no mention of it in the orientation, and I'd never seen a door that led down. But if the journal was right, it was my only chance. I grabbed the journal and shone my flashlight around the lobby, searching for anything that might indicate a hidden entrance. The shadows were closing in now, their icy tendrils brushing against my skin, sending shivers down my spine. And then I saw it. A faint outline of a door beneath the staircase. I rushed to it, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The door was old, its wood warped and cracked, and it had no visible handle. I pushed against it, but it didn't budge. Behind me, the whispers grew louder, more aggressive. The shadows were almost upon me, their forms twisting and writhing in ways that defied logic. Desperate, I flipped through the journal again, hoping for some kind of clue. On one of the last pages, I found it. "The key is in the drawer. Use it wisely." I dashed back to the front desk, flinging open every drawer until I found a small, rusted key. Grabbing it, I sprinted back to the door and jammed the key into an almost invisible keyhole. The lock clicked. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into pitch darkness. The air that wafted up was damp and foul, carrying the unmistakable scent of decay. I didn't have time to hesitate. The shadows were right behind me, their whispers now a deafening roar. I stepped into the darkness and slammed the door shut behind me, locking it with the key. For a moment, there was silence. The staircase seemed to go on forever, each step creaking under my weight. The flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, illuminating only a few feet ahead. My breathing was shallow, my nerves on edge, every creak and groan of the old wood sending a jolt of fear through me. Finally, I reached the bottom. The basement was massive, its walls lined with shelves filled with dusty jars and strange objects I couldn't identify. In the center of the room was a large, circular stone slab, engraved with the same symbols I had seen in the journal, and standing next to it was a figure. It was the woman in white, but this time she wasn't alone. Surrounding her were more figures, men, women, and children, all dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their eyes dark and hollow. They stared at me in unison, their expressions blank, their presence suffocating. "You shouldn't have come here," the woman said, her voice calm but filled with menace. "I didn't have a choice," I stammered, clutching the journal like it could protect me. "You always have a choice," she replied, stepping closer. "But now it's too late." The stone slab began to glow, the symbols pulsing with an eerie red light. The figures around me started to chant, their voices low and guttural, vibrating through the air. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" The woman smiled, but it wasn't comforting. It was cold and cruel. "We don't want you, Ethan. We want them." "Them?" I whispered, confused. "The ones watching?" she said, her hollow eyes seeming to pierce through the screen, as if addressing whoever was listening to this story. "Who are they? Are you one of them? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video if you're still watching." The woman's gaze lingered for a moment longer, and then she turned back toward the glowing stone slab. The chanting grew louder, and the air around me became thick, making it hard to breathe. I stumbled backward, gripping the flashlight so tightly, my knuckles turned white. The figures around the woman began to move, stepping closer to the slab as if drawn to it. Their bodies moved unnaturally, jerking and contorting as if they were puppets on strings. The journal in my hand felt heavier, almost as if it were alive. I flipped to the next page, desperate for answers. The ritual binds them here. Break the circle, and they lose their power. But beware, failure comes at a cost. I scanned the basement, my eyes locking onto the glowing symbols on the floor surrounding the stone slab. They formed a perfect circle, pulsing with energy. "Break the circle," I muttered to myself. But how? My heart raced as I searched the room for anything that could disrupt the symbols. I spotted a rusted iron rod leaning against the wall. Without thinking, I grabbed it and approached the edge of the circle. The moment I stepped closer, the chanting stopped. Every figure in the room turned to face me. Their hollow eyes were fixed on mine, their expressions blank but somehow menacing. "Don't do it," the woman said, her voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. "You don't understand the consequences." "I don't care," I shouted, slamming the iron rod into the glowing symbols. Sparks flew as the rod connected with the stone, and the light flickered. The figures let out an ear-piercing scream, their forms writhing as if in agony. The room shook violently, dust and debris falling from the ceiling. But the symbols weren't fully broken. The glow dimmed but didn't disappear entirely. The woman's expression changed, her calm demeanor replaced with fury. She moved toward me, her movements swift and predatory. "You've made a grave mistake," she hissed, her voice layered with an inhuman growl. I swung the iron rod at her, but it passed through her like smoke. Her hollow eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I felt as though she could see every thought, every fear in my mind. "You think you can save yourself," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "This place doesn't let go, and neither do we." Before I could respond, the ground beneath me cracked, and a deep rumbling noise filled the air. The stone slab began to sink into the floor, the symbols around it shattering like glass. The figures dissolved into shadows, their forms swirling around me in a chaotic storm. The woman was the last to disappear, her face twisting into a sinister grin. "This isn't over," she whispered, her voice fading as she vanished. I stood there, trembling, the iron rod still clutched in my hand. The room was silent now, the oppressive energy gone. The slab and the figures had vanished, leaving nothing but an empty space where the ritual had taken place. But the journal was still in my hand, its pages blank now. As if the words had been erased, I climbed back up the stairs, my legs weak and unsteady. When I reached the lobby, the clock on the wall read 3:01 a.m. The lodge was eerily quiet, as if nothing had happened, but I knew better. I don't know what I unleashed down there, or if I truly escaped. But one thing is certain. This place isn't just a lodge. It's something much darker, something that doesn't belong in this world. And as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. So now, I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have broken the circle or left it untouched? Let me know in the comments. And remember, if you ever find yourself at a lodge with strange rules, maybe it's best not to stay at all. As the clock struck 3:01 a.m., a false sense of relief washed over me. The lodge was quiet, the oppressive energy seemingly gone. I stood in the center of the lobby, the journal clutched in my hand, staring at the ornate mirror on the wall. My reflection had returned, but something about it felt off. It mimicked my every movement perfectly this time, but its eyes seemed darker, emptier. A thought nagged at the back of my mind. Was it really over? I tried to convince myself that it was, that whatever I had done in the basement had ended the nightmare. But deep down, I knew better. The lodge wasn't normal, and it wasn't going to let me leave so easily. I turned to head upstairs to my room, deciding I'd pack my things and leave as soon as daylight broke. But as I climbed the stairs, I heard a faint creaking behind me. I paused, flashlight in hand, and looked over my shoulder. The lobby was empty, just as I'd left it. "Just your nerves, Ethan," I whispered to myself. "Get a grip." But as I reached the top of the staircase, I saw it. A shadow, standing in the doorway of my room. My heart stopped. The shadow didn't move, didn't breathe. It was just there. A dark, featureless outline of a person. My flashlight flickered as I pointed it toward the figure, but the beam seemed to bend around it, as if it were absorbing the light. I took a step back, my pulse racing. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. No response. Then, it moved, not toward me, but into my room, disappearing into the darkness. I should have run. Any sane person would have bolted out of the lodge and never looked back. But something compelled me to follow. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the lodge's hold over me. Or maybe it was the lingering thought that I had to see this through to the end. I entered the room cautiously, my flashlight sweeping over the walls and furniture. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My suitcase by the bed, my coat draped over the chair. But the shadow was gone, or so I thought. As I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. The flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor, and the room was plunged into darkness. "Ethan," a voice whispered, so close it felt like it was right against my ear. I spun around, blindly reaching for the flashlight. When I found it and flicked it back on, I saw them, the figures from the basement. They stood in a circle around me, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The woman in white was at the center, her expression calm and cold. "You thought you could end it," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "But this isn't something you can escape. The lodge isn't just a place. It's a gateway, and you've opened it." I shook my head, backing away until my back hit the wall. "I didn't mean to. I was just trying to survive." "Survival comes at a cost," she replied. "And now you belong to us." The figures closed in, their forms twisting and merging with the shadows around them. The room grew colder, the air heavier, until I couldn't breathe. In my final moments, I realized the truth. The rules weren't there to keep the guests safe. They were there to ensure the lodge's secrets remained hidden. By breaking them, I hadn't just endangered myself. I'd unleashed something far worse. The last thing I saw was the woman's face, her hollow eyes staring into mine as the darkness consumed me. The next morning, the lodge looked as it always did, quaint, quiet, and inviting. A new night manager arrived, their face full of optimism and curiosity. The staff handed them the same list of rules, and the cycle began again. What would you have done differently? Would you have followed the rules, or broken them like I did? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and share the video. Who knows? Maybe next time, the story will be about you.